Welcome. Thanks for joining me for an asana a day. Keeps the vrittis away. Today we're going to work with Adhomukha Śvānāsana, also known as the downward facing dog. And this pose is an important one to focus on because it does so much for the whole body. And people either tend to love it or hate it. And for that very reason, people tend to hate it because it just challenges so many different parts of the body, the shoulders, the wrists, the ankles, the feet, the hamstrings, the hips. But that's also why I love the pose, and a lot of people love it because in one pose you get so much out of it. So today I'm going to break a few things down in order to kind of hope to make this pose a little more pleasant for you and to hone in on some of the issues and ways to work with it. So we're going to focus on the shoulders, and at the end of this video you will see a link to another video that I have that particularly works on hip maintenance and helping you to get your hamstrings lengthened out. And that is a big one for making this pose more pleasant and accessible. But we're going to focus on the upper body part and a little bit the feet and ankles. So let's work with our shoulders. Standing in Tadasana, mountain pose, feet are parallel, hip width apart. By that I mean my knees and ankles are lined up right underneath my hip sockets here. All right, and my feet are parallel, not turned out. And as I press the ball of the foot down and lift my toes up, I'm shifting my weight into the heels so that the heels are taking most of the weight. Your toes can move around freely, they can rest on the floor, but they're not bearing weight. Good. So from Tadasana, we're going to work with our shoulders. The root of the shoulders are the shoulder blades, so we're going to just play with some movements that the shoulder blades do. They glide up, they glide down, they squeeze together, they spread apart. And if we combine these movements, you get a circle. So we can glide them up, squeeze them together and back as we glide down, and spread them away from each other, and then back up. So just kind of let your shoulder blades glide over the rib cage. The shoulder blades really have one bony connection to your central skeleton, which is at the collarbone here. So the shoulder blades really give us a lot of movement, and I switch directions. So I'm squeezing together, gliding up, taking them apart, gliding down. So they're just sandwiched in muscle. And that's what we need to juice up and warm up and create some fluidity in the muscle tissue as well as the connective tissue. Good. So after some shoulder blade circles, stand in Tadasana for a moment and just notice how that feels. Hopefully you're feeling some warmth and some aliveness there. So let's do a little more formal yoga posture. So I'm taking these arms from the pose called Garudasana. But first we're just going to stretch our arms out to the sides and then bring them across the front. So like a hug, you're getting a hug. And then open them up. This time as you hug yourself, put the other arm on top. And open them up. And exhaling, I got my right arm on top this time. The shoulder blades are spread wide apart. Inhale, open them up. Exhale, the other arm, left arm on top. Shoulder blades are wide apart. And open them up. And then let's bend at the elbow and bring the arms together. See if you can bring your elbows all the way up to your hands together and glide them down and up and down and up. You're still in your Tadasana position, so from the hips, rooting down into the earth through your heels. Good, and then let's open the arms up and bring your forearms parallel to the floor. And we'll glide together and apart. Squeeze the shoulder blades together back there. Together and apart. So when I'm saying together and apart here, I'm talking about my arms. Let's focus our attention on our shoulder blades. Right now, as I take my elbows as far back as I can, my shoulder blades are squeezing together. Now let the shoulder blades come apart, away from the spine. And each time I do this, I'm taking a different arm on top. Good. So we're going to do one more. And give yourself a hug. You did a good job. Get a hug. And if you can get your elbows to be one on top of the other or even crossing, you can bring your forearms up. If they're here, you might like to just take one hand down, the bottom one, place it on the outer upper arm bone and draw that arm across the body. Okay, so that's your alternative here to bringing your forearms up. Some people will be able to bring the hands together. That's not necessary, but the palms face away from each other. And if that bottom hand can come around, you can get that little hook, but don't do weird things with your wrists to try to get it. You could take a towel in your hands or a yoga belt. Good. So as you stand here in Tadasana, let the shoulder blades glide away from each other on the upper back. Let the base of the skull move back and up. And then we'll release that and open up. And we're going to take the other arm on top. So bring your forearms up. If that doesn't work for you, just take that bottom hand and along the upper arm bone and just give this arm a chance to stretch across the body. So we're bringing the forearms up if that works. Palms facing away from each other. And then if you can, you connect the hands. But the focus here is on letting those shoulder blades spread apart and the base of the skull lifting back and up. Taking a few breaths here. These arms go with the pose Garudasana. And then we'll release and open up. Release the arms down to your sides and just notice how this feels. How are you feeling in the upper back, your arms, your shoulders, the neck and the head? So now that our shoulders are warmed up, we're going to take this to the wall and do what I call sort of a half dog at the wall. You could do this at a countertop, a ledge of some sort. This is more challenging. If you have a wall, you can actually take your hands higher up. Higher up is going to be easier. So I'm at about shoulder height. Take the hands. It's a good place to start. And I'm just going to begin walking back, bending forward at the hips so that my hips end up directly over my ankles and my arms are now overhead. So you know that if your hands were on a countertop or a table, you would be a lot lower in this pose, much more challenging for the shoulders and your hips. So if that's hard, walk the hands up the wall. And if your shoulders feel tight, you can take the hands wider apart. You'll notice I have my fingertips on the wall. You could do palms. I kind of like the fingertips to sort of push into the wall and let my arms rise overhead and letting those shoulder blades glide upward like we did in our shoulder blade circles. And as I push into the wall, I'm reaching my sitting bones back as if I'm going to sit on the wall behind me. Take a breath here. Really let yourself lengthen. Nice soft exhalation. There's a little bit of tone in the lower belly, just supporting the front of the spine. And that kind of fits in with the lengthening. If things are opening up, of course, the hands can go lower and you adjust. This is going to be kind of opening up the shoulders, lengthening the spine, stretching the back of the legs. Good. And then I'm going to tuck the tail. Scoop your tail under and walk toward the wall as you breathe in. Drop the arms down by your sides. Standing in Tadasana, just notice how this feels. So that's a nice way to really warm up the shoulders and get things opened up. We're going to go down to the feet now. And you could stand at a wall. You don't really need to, or at a countertop if you just want something for a little support. But I'm just going to slide one foot back from Tadasana position. So I'm still standing really dynamically in this hip and this foot as opposed to just hanging out here. And taking the foot back, reaching the heel up as the toes stay on the floor. So getting a stretch from my toes and the sole of the foot. So a lot of people find downward dog actually is tricky for their toes. They're noticing all of a sudden that their toes have really lost a lot of flexibility. So another thing here is that when I do this, I'm really on like the first 3 toes. So I'm going to roll a little bit toward the little toe and back. Good. And then you bring it back. You do the other side. So just reaching that heel up as high as you can as the toes and the ball of the foot stay on the floor. You know, so if the toes are really stiff, it might be like this, and you're working your way towards more mobility there. And then you can roll from the little toe side back to the big toe. Good. And then coming back. You could repeat that. You could do this several times throughout the day. That's going to change that tightness. This time I'm taking the foot back with the top of the toes on the floor. And again, this one surprises people often, like it might just sort of be the tips of the toes. But you're working on eventually opening the front of the ankle and letting the front of the foot press toward the floor with the tops of the toes on the floor. And it's the same situation as before, that you're kind of only getting the first 3 toes, so roll a little bit. And that's why I like to be near a wall, so that if you lost your balance, you didn't do some weird move on your ankle there. So just kind of roll through, and we'll switch sides. Tops of the toes on the floor now, or maybe it's the tips, and you're just letting the front of the ankle press forward and or down. Letting that stretch and rolling from the little toe side toward the big toe. Good. This is a good thing to do every day if you're really finding this quite challenging. All right, so this next thing is again at the wall. I'm going to grab my socks. I like to do this with my socks. You really don't have to, but I don't know, I find it to be more fun, and I tend to do this in the morning while I'm waiting for my tea water to boil, and I'm at my kitchen counter. So like I'm at a wall here, but you could be at a counter. And you don't necessarily have to hold on, but for many people it feels more stable. So I'm just sliding one foot back. So I'm bending this knee, and it's ideal to keep it over the ankle as opposed to going this way, right? So you could stand quite close as you slide this foot back, and I'm trying to keep this heel down, right? And I'm pressing my front of my hip, my thigh forward as I soften the front of the ankle and reach that heel down. And then I'm going to press through the front heel and bring myself up. Slide the other foot back. So soften the front of the ankle. Really let this hip open. So this thigh is pressing back as the ankle softens and the heel is reaching for the floor. Your heel might come up a little bit, in which case you can just play a little, just do a little sliding back and forth. We're just kind of getting the Achilles tendon and the calf muscles warmed up. So another thing that you can do is slide this foot back just a little bit and then bend the knee, right? So bending the knee, which gets into a slightly different place than I got here, right? So bend that knee and then come back up, Slide your foot back, bend the knee. You're getting lower into the, closer to the heel there. Good. And then we slide back up and come back and stand in Tadasana. So you're going to take your socks off. Okay, now we're heading for the floor. We're going to come onto hands and knees. And the first thing we're going to play with is some movement in the hip socket. So I'm just going to get my hips warmed up by letting the pelvis rock back and forth over the axis of the hip sockets. So really the hip socket is getting some synovial fluid from this movement. And I'm also preparing my hips for when I go into the pose, that I'm actually moving from my hips, moving from the pelvis, moving from the deep belly. All right? And we're not going to just pop up into the pose. I like to challenge my strength and also make sure that I'm not kind of skipping over my weak areas and just using my strong areas to get up into the pose. So you might notice that in yourself if you get ready for the pose and you lift one knee and then you take the other up. So we're not going to let that happen. Spread your fingers wide, particularly pressing through the thumb and the index finger. For safety in your wrist, you want to avoid dropping all your weight into the outer hand, right? So if your hand looks like this, you're going to eventually create some problems for your wrists. So you're really pressing through here. You can really grab with your fingertips and the base of the fingers. This takes practice. And there's a whole video on the channel about wrists. There's actually 2 of them, so go to that if you need help on this. And I'm going to push the floor away. So my shoulder blades are coming apart here. And I'm also going to tuck the tail and draw the lower belly up into the front body firmly for support. As I push the floor away, my shoulder blades are wide, and I'm just going to lift the knees up. So I'm not going into the pose yet. Just this little hovering. Notice that my hips are staying low. I'm just let my knees do a little takeoff, and then let them land lightly. And we'll do a little pelvic rocking, and you can let that flow all the way up to your head. Starts in the hips with just that pelvic rocking we were doing, but gliding, rippling upward. And then when you're ready, we'll do another one. So we're pushing the floor away. Shoulder blades are not coming together, they're pressing, sliding apart. Scoop the tail, draw your lower belly up, and just lift your knees. Good. So then, you could do that a few times, lightly land and do some spinal waves. And then when you're ready, you push the floor away, tuck the tail, draw the lower belly up and lift. So then, to go up into the pose, we're going to untuck. The tuck was just to get those knees off the floor. We're going to lift the tail. Let it rise up. Your hands are still pushing the floor. Your shoulder blades are gliding up your rib cage. They have to go up in order for your arms to go overhead in a safe way for your shoulders. So I'm lifting the tail. Notice I haven't straightened my knees yet. If the shoulders are really tight, you may not get your knees straight. If you're really working here with the arms, pushing the floor away, sending your hips up and back toward the wall behind you. Then it's a good thing we did all that work with the toes, because, here we are relying on these toes that have some flexibility. And we're going to walk our dog. So I'm just letting one heel lower while the other heel lifts, as I'm pushing the floor away with my hands. Please take a break and come down into child pose if you need to, and then you can come back up and join me. But I'm just
creating some fluidity in all my tissues. The connective tissue is getting hydrated as I do this little walking motion. Breathe. Good. Okay, and then at some point, I may just like to lift my heels as high as I can, stretch the toes, and soften the ankle and let the heel release into the earth, right? If your heels don't go all the way down, that's okay. And you may find for some time that you're needing to keep your knees bent a little bit. Please go and do the work that I suggested earlier for the hips and hamstrings to bring all these pieces together. I'm pressing the floor down with my hands and pushing the mat forward. My feet are pressing the mat down and back. I'm going to end up with a longer mat. And this is wonderful as your tail is reaching up into the air. Your spine is getting some traction as it just drapes down toward the floor, supported by your strong limbs. Breathe into your belly. And we're going to do one more little thing, playing with diagonals. Like I said, if you need to come down, and then come back up. Diagonals, I mean by one hand to the opposite foot. So I'm pressing down through my right hand, down into the floor and forward, and my left foot is pressing down and stretching the mat back. So I've got this diagonal that I'm working with. The other hand and foot, as you can see, are light. Then I'm going to switch. Left hand, right foot. Stretch the mat along that diagonal. And let's do one more time. Right hand, left foot. Press the mat down and away, like stretching it longer along that diagonal. And then we'll switch to the other side. Left hand, right foot. Good. And then you're going to engage both diagonals, pressing down through both hands, both feet, and outward, and breathe. Now to come out of this pose, we're going to lift our heels, tuck the tail, scoop it under, draw your lower belly up, give yourself a lot of support as you slowly lower the knees to the floor, letting them land. You're going to untuck the toes, reach your hips back towards your heels, and bring your head to something. So if it's your folded hands, or to the floor, or maybe you need a little more height like a block or a bolster, but let your head touch something. And I'm taking my hands back since my head does reach the floor, and it feels really nice on my shoulders, and my hands get a little rest. And we're going to just exhale and drop all of our weight, just surrender it to the legs and to the floor. And let the in-breath open up your back body. Allow the back ribs to spread apart. Receive the inhalation. And then we'll walk the hands forward, placing the hands on the floor beneath the shoulders. Press down, let your head hang as you breathe in and come up. And then you could continue on with some other poses in your practice. And I just want to come toward the camera and let you see the quote on my shirt. So, remaining the same in success or failure, equanimity is known as yoga. So that's one definition of yoga, remaining in a state of equanimity. So may your practice bring you equanimity and peace and a sense of feeling really great.
Namaste.